when we were pastoring at church in Sydney, we planted this church called Open House Church, and it was set in a community centre, and it was right beside a big shopping centre, and a lot of cars parked there. And I used to love to open up the doors on a Sunday morning when the worship team were practising and let the music just float out over the car park. And one Sunday morning, a lady is walking past with 2 dogs. And she stops, hears the music, and she comes into the community centre with her 2 dogs, and she says, is this Christian music? I said, yeah, we've got a church that starts at 10 o'clock. I said, why don't you hang around and you can listen to the band practising and stay. And so she did. So she and her 2 dogs planted herself in Open House Church that morning. About halfway through the service, she left. The next week, she came back without the dogs and a friend with her. And the friend told me, she says, I've come because my friend invited him. She says, you've got to come to a church where they'll let dogs into church, right? And so I was just encouraged by the way she brought her friend to a church that allowed dogs. Now, separate to that, there was a young couple at Open House that were about to dedicate their little son. And so that was going to be the following week. And she invited a school friend to the dedication of her son. Her school friend, she'd been best friends since year 7. And in year 7 and 8, her friend got bullied at school, and Sina would protect her and stand up for her. And as a result of that, her friend started coming along to a Christian youth group and became a Christian. But then in her teenage years, she walked right away from God. But Sina had kept this friendship going, this connection, and she invited her... that's better. She invited her on this Sunday. And when Sina's friend walked in, she was shocked to see her mother sitting there, because this girl and her mother were sort of a bit estranged. Their relationship was a bit... Her mum was sort of a Christian, and when her daughter walked away from God, the relationship broke down over stuff. And the lady that came with the 2 dogs, it was her friend she brought, was the mother of this girl. And on this Sunday morning, God put a mother and a daughter, they sat together, their relationship was restored, and they both were restored to God in this one church. Now, how does that work? How does totally unrelated circumstances and the timing of that, how does that work? Well, it's God, isn't it, right? And so I did something and had no clue of the impact. Sina invited her friend and had no clue that her mum would be there. And it's this stuff that God does, these setups that we trip into, and God's in there already ahead of us. And Paul explains it this way. This is in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. He says this, and all this is a gift from God, who brought us back to himself through Christ and gave us this task of reconciling people to him. The NIV says, and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That sounds so official, doesn't it? The ministry of reconciliation. It's like, well, it's meant to. Paul uses this very official Greek word. It's an official appointment. It's because it's from God. It's an appointment that God gives us. And reconciliation, it's a word that comes from a Latin word which means to make good again. But the original Greek word, it means restoration of favour, and get this, it must be mutual. But it actually means a whole lot more than that. And it's this word picture of 2 people exchanging coins of different values. and making a mutual adjustment to the value of the coins. When Jeff and I were little kids and we played Monopoly, I would try to con him out of more money than I should in the exchange of money. If I was banking, I would sort of slip a few more extra notes into the system. And Jeff, being an honest sort of person, would get upset with that, right? Because it wasn't mutual. But this is mutual. And the adjustment of the differences in the coins was mutually worked out. Forgiveness doesn't have to be mutual. You can forgive a parent that's wronged you and they're dead. You can forgive someone that is in your world and you're upset with them and you don't even have to tell them that you're upset, but you can forgive them and not even mention it, and it benefits the relationship. But true reconciliation always is mutual. My mum was a matchmaker. And I'd just got my P's, just turned 18. Coral had just turned 17. And it was our first official date. And we were going to a thing that, if you're younger than some of you, you won't know what this is, but it was called a drive-in, right? And you took your car and you sat and watched a movie. And you had the little speakers that you hooked onto your window, and you tried to make sure you remembered when you drove off not to leave them hanging on the window, right? But we went to the Sale drive-in together. Now, I've just got my licence. And what did my mum say to me? She didn't say, now, Lex, drive really carefully. You've got precious cargo on board. She says to me, Lex, just so you know, the longest way home is the sweetest way home. What a dumb thing to say to this boy, right? I didn't need any encouraging. But matchmaking is fun, especially when it actually works out. Imagine the joy of introducing drummer Joel to his future wife. Imagine if you know someone that you think would suit Joel and you put them together, because Joel's open for offers. And so if you could broker that, imagine the joy of seeing them walk down the aisle in here and you are part of that. Now, for all those that are feeling a little protective of Joel right now, and for what I did last Sunday, with Joel's permission, I'm going to read out the text he sent me after I said what I said last Sunday. He says, "Hey Lex, thanks for this morning. With that wedding thing came out of left wing, but maybe it's crazy enough just to work. See what happens. Sorry if you do get into trouble from Coral, but maybe that's what God was intending, someone to start a little show. The drummer wants a wife." See, reconciliation is matchmaking for God. And it can only work if it's mutual. And it's fun when we discover the part we play. That Sunday at Open House Church, when that mother and daughter sat together for the first time and talked to each other for the first time in a long time, do you know how good that felt coming home that day and understanding that in my ignorance and my little response to a lady with 2 dogs, that was part of getting a family back together with each other and with God. But this is the principle in how this works. Without God, we can't. And without us, God won't. See, God has limited himself to working through us. And the role of matchmaking, it's fun. It's a privilege. It's joyful. Now, I had a lady ring me one day in our church in Sydney, And she said, Lex, my husband says he doesn't love me anymore and he doesn't want anything to do with me. And I'm just heartbroken. And so for the next number of weeks, she did all she could to try to win her husband back. And all she felt was rejection from him. She got to the point where she no longer, because she was so hurt from the rejection and what he was saying to her, she no longer wanted to have him in her life. She wanted a divorce. And she shifted out. And he goes, oh, I miss you. I love you. And then he comes to me pouring his heart out and crying and saying, I want to get back with my wife, but she doesn't want me anymore. I couldn't get the two of them mutually wanting each other. They were back and forward. Actually, the good news is they're together today. Eventually, we got them both wanting to be together at the same time, right? But it has to be mutual. Reconciliation has to be mutual. And when Jesus told the story that we call the prodigal son, it's really a story of two sons, and it probably should be called the Father Heart of God. Because when one son turned for home, the dad was already watching, already longing to see him, ran to him, wrapped his arms around him, and restored him to favour. And when the older son was offended by his younger brother being restored to favour, it was the dad that tried to bring reconciliation between the brothers. That's the Father Heart of God. And if you know anything about God's heart, you know that from his side of the deal, he's ready. The moment we turn for home, he's there to wrap our arms around us. It's just one of the most beautiful things to know that about God. Now, this word reconciliation, this English word, if you looked up a dictionary, it will say the restoration of friendly relationships. But Paul wasn't using a common old everyday garden variety type English word. Paul's using a Greek word that he actually stole from the commercial world of the money changers. And it's just so much richer and how it is applied to our life. If you were travelling overseas and you wanted to change Aussie dollars for American dollars, you could go to a bank, at the airport you can do it, right? And you hand over your Aussie money and they hand back American money. And on the day, you don't know what the exchange rate will be, but you just have to take whatever you're given. But the big difference in this word picture that Paul's painting is that both parties benefit, both parties profit from the exchange. Imagine if every time you exchange money, you got more back than you gave. That would be fun, wouldn't it, right? So in this exchange that Paul's talking about, it's mutually agreed upon, or there's no exchange. There's no reconciliation. And God has already worked out what he will pay for you and I. He's already decided that. It's already been done. What he would exchange for you. It's not us, it's us, not God, who has the most to gain. It's us, not God, who actually desperately is longing for reconciliation. He's set the terms, he's made the invitation, and it's all stacked up in our favour. Lynn, welcome back from New Zealand, hey? Fantastic. We missed you. Yeah. How'd you go, Steve? Did you get any deer? No, you're shaking your head the wrong way. It's meant to go like that. Yeah. Welcome back too. When we take a handful of coins and exchange them with the Creator of the universe, this is what we get. His solid gold strength for our copper weakness. His acceptance for our rejection. His peace for our anxiety. His forgiveness for our sin. His release from our regrets. His healing for the trauma and the pain that we feel. His strategy when in life you have no solution to a situation. He's a God of strategies. His comfort for our grief. His leading when we're struggling with the choices in life. What do? God can lead us. His answer and his assurance when we've got doubts. And that's just the start. This morning Amy was saying it's progressive, this relationship with God. And when we enter into this beautiful exchange of coins, we then get deputised to become coin brokers ourselves. And we're given the ministry of matchmaking between people in our known world and God, and people in our known world and each other. But here's the thing. In Paul's word picture, the broker also profits from every mutual transaction that takes place. If you're involved in bringing two people together, you benefit. If you're involved in bringing someone to God, you benefit. There's a payoff to you personally. There's a reward system. And that's why the money exchangers are in business. They took their little percentage, didn't they? If you've exchanged money, you know someone takes money out of what you had, you know. You start off with so many dollars and then you go overseas and you've got nothing left to spend. Unless you go to New Zealand. But we benefit. When we're in Sydney, I had the privilege for a number of years of being part of a small team that looked after 55 ACC churches, about 110 pastors, and we held these district events about 3 or 4 times a year, and all the pastors and leaders from the different churches, ACC churches, would gather at this big church in Liverpool, and we would put this night on to encourage them. And one of my jobs on the night, at the start of the night, was to go around all the people and make them feel welcome. And this particular Tuesday night, there was an old bloke sitting there I'd never seen before. And went up to him and asked him his name. His name was Billy. And he had like a Pommy accent. And I'm talking to him, and he wasn't a pastor. He wasn't really part of a church. He was, I don't know how he got there, but he's just hungry for God somehow. And I'm chatting to him, and I picked up on his accent. I said, you're from England? And he goes, no, I'm Irish. All you Kiwis are the same. You know? And I sort of liked him. He had a limp. He'd been shot when he was in the Irish Army. He'd been shot in the leg by a sniper's bullet when he was up on a truck, and I like people in our church that had gunshot wounds, you know. And that was the second one. The other bloke shot himself in the foot accidentally. But I liked Billy. That was on Tuesday night. Sunday morning, I'm facing this way with the band, and then I get up to preach, and there's Billy sitting at the back of the building. And I'm looking at him and I'm thinking, how did he get here? He's stalking me. And I went up to him afterwards. I said, Billy, what are you doing here? And he says, well, what are you doing here? And I said, this is my church. And he says, well, someone shoved a little promo for Open House Church in my letterbox, and I was looking for a church, so that's why I'm here. And I said, I did that. I put that in. Where do you live? And he says, and it was just around the corner from our house. And so Billy and I became really good friends. His wife started coming to Open House Church, and then his daughter, who had never ever had anything to do with God, she came, her husband came, their son came, Billy's daughter started doing a GTM course with us, and God entered their world. Do you know what joy that brought to me? Just playing a little part in the brokering of that exchange. I put something in a letterbox, and there was something mutual going on in Billy that led to his whole family, right? Now, Paul only uses this word reconciliation. He only uses it 4 times in the whole New Testament. But in Ephesians chapter 4, which is like a really critical teaching on how the church is to function, Paul doesn't use the word reconciliation. He begins with this: I urge you. The New LT says, I beg you. There's passion in this. He says, live a life worthy of the calling you have received. On the 26th of January next year, in the Myer Music Bowl, where they have the carols each year, our Charlie is going to be singing and playing, and he's been invited to be on the centre stage of this big gathering for Survival Day. It's going to be people from all different backgrounds, but particularly First Nation people. And Charlie has been invited to do a 30-minute spot of all his original songs, acoustic guitar, blues harp, harmonica, right? In fact, Charlie, you're even writing a song especially for the occasion, aren't you? Right? Now, that is such a privilege, that is such an honour for Charlie to be asked to do that, right? To personally be invited to do this. And Coral and I are planning to actually go there, Charlie, and support you, right? We're going to do that. It's going to be fun. And you know what? On the day, the crowd will love you, Charlie. They'll love your songs. But you know what? Of all the people there that day, not the crowd, but you will get the most out of that, right? You'll be the one that carries this thing that's been put upon you. And I'm just so proud of you, Charlie, because God's prepared you for this moment. And it's significant, and it's special. And Paul says, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. And calling is this personal invitation to a feast. It's a response that has direct benefit to you. To Charlie, you've been invited, you'll benefit. But it benefits all those that are part of that banquet. And it comes from this root word which means to call aloud by name. It's your personal invitation. It's to matchmake for God, to be a coin broker that mutually benefits everyone involved. Charlie, you're going to do your very best. And I know you're probably slightly a little bit nervous. There's probably even times you even have a little self-doubt. But you're going to be practiced. You're going to be worthy of the call that you got to go and be part of this big event. During my few short years on earth, perhaps the most successful strategy that the enemy has had against we, the Western Church, has not come through governments. It's not come through changes of views towards sexuality and gender or any other issue. I think what the enemy's greatest strategy has been that's worked is to shut us down through the pushback, that sense of resistance we have to this one word. And I'm going to try and say this word. It's a difficult word to say. It's it's just hard. Evangelism. It's a really hard word to say because it's become almost a bad word. And yet God designed it to be this most beautiful experience for all involved. I want you to listen to the heart of God through Paul's words in Romans chapter 10. And there's the NLT, and I'll just read it to you. I think it's up. I think we've got it out in the van there. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. But how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they've never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? And how will anyone go and tell them without being sent? That's why Paul says we've been called to the ministry of reconciliation. We've been called to something worthy. And then he says, that is why the scriptures say, how beautiful are the feet of messengers who bring good news. If you're wondering what your best feature is, it's your feet. If someone says to you, oh, you've got beautiful eyes, you should say, you should see my feet. Because see, I think that Jesus' followers have above average beautiful feet. And so Joel is busting back there, I know, because he thinks that this is like biblical support for a Barefoot Sunday coming up in January, right? So I think we've been pushed in that direction, Joel. Sounds good. But if you think when you hear that Paul is probably being a bit idealistic, I want you to listen to the very next words that he says out of his mouth. He says, but not everyone welcomes the good news. And then verse 7 he says, so faith comes from hearing, that is, hearing the good news about Jesus. And then Paul asks two brilliant questions that I doubt you've ever noticed in your Bibles. And they're brilliant questions, and this is them. There's the two of them. Have the people actually heard the message? And did the people really understand? Wow. If you think that you've communicated good news, did people actually hear that? And did they understand? When we were doing a lot of work with youth in Bairnsdale, they started coming to Pearson Street on a Sunday night. I didn't ask them. They just started rocking up to church. And they would rock up with their rollerblades still attached to their feet, and they'd roll down into church, and then they'd roll out again. And at first, the adults were really excited to see all these street kids, these feral kids coming to church. But then they just got up and left whenever they wanted to. And then people would say to me, they're not really interested in God, are they? And I'd say to them, but they never even heard about God. Our culture got in the road, our church culture, before they ever heard the message this night. They left before they ever heard anything or understood anything. And that led eventually us to running a youth church up in the Bark on a Sunday night, and that worked. Evangelism is a dirty word to many Christians. It's not been a good experience for those in our community at times either. And just like it's not a word that we love, there are people in our community that find the word church a dirty word because of their experiences or things that they know have happened. And so when we're going to paint the building, we're going to put signage out the front, we had to ask ourselves the question, will we put the name church on the outside of this building? Redgum Church. And the answer is yes. Of course we will. Because I am confident that we can change people's perceptions We can change the experience that people think they're going to have by encountering God's way of doing church. And I'm just as naive to believe that we can become coin brokers and matchmakers if we do it God's way, where we have done it badly. Honestly, we, the Western Church, we've got a lot of stuff wrong. But I believe we can actually get it right, and it can be enjoyable for us. And it can be enjoyable for those that are mutually wanting to get involved in this beautiful exchange between us and God. I want to finish with this story. It's a story of two people that I learnt a lot from. In Sydney, where we lived, there was a park behind our house. And there was an area in there where you could run dogs off the lead. And there was an easement beside our house so people could get access to the park. And over time, I just built up quite a lot of friendships and relationships with the people in our community. And Greg and Mel, they used to walk their dog after work most days. And over time, we just got to know each other really like friends. He gave me bird cages he picked up off the side of the road, and I gave him koi fish that I'd been breeding, and we're in each other's houses. But he loved to tell me how he thought God did not exist. He said, I'm an atheist. In fact, I think it's a whole lot of, and what you believe is just rubbish. And he was really anti-God and anti-Christians. In fact, he'd worked for a Christian pastor who had a flooring business, and he'd done work for him and had not been paid. And so he could show me in real life a bad Christian. And every time he wanted to prickle me with his stuff, I loved it. And it gave me an opportunity to respond just by loving him back, not arguing him, not trying to convince him of anything. And then one day he came to me, he says, Lex, he says, Mel's got cancer and they've given her 2 months to live. It's lung cancer, it's all through her. And he said, when you're praying to Yui up there, he says, can you throw one up there for Mel, will you? And I just looked at him, I said, you're joking. You want me to pray to a God you don't believe in? And we laughed. I said, yeah, I will. And I remember saying to him one day, I can't pray for Mel to be healed. I said, I don't have the faith to pray for Mel to be healed, but I have the faith to believe that whatever you go through with the loss of Mel, you can be okay at the other end. And so he'd started making plans to sell his house when she died, and he would shift to Tasmania and start a new life in Tasmania. And one day I was talking to both of them together, and Mel says, can I come to your church one morning? I said, yeah, I'd love you to. I said, Greg, do you want to? No, I'm not coming. I'm not going in that place. He said, you can go if you want to. So Mel came by herself. What do you do as a church when someone's got a short time to live? We loved on her. Someone went over the shopping centre and bought this great big bunch of flowers and gave to her, and we just loved on her. Some weeks went by, and I had this supernatural miracle happen to a dog of mine, and I saw God do something that I'd never really seen to that level before, and it changed something in me. And I was walking back from the street one day, and Mel was out the front of her house, and I stopped and says, Mel, I've got to apologise to you. We've never prayed for you to be healed. And God's done something in me, changed me. And I want to pray for you. So on the side of the road, I lay hands on Mel and prayed for her. And God healed her. Technically, the cancer's gone to sleep. But she's fine. She didn't die. And I got to play a little tiny role in an exchange where God gave healing where there was just disease. That's about 4 years ago. Yeah. So I don't know an update. I haven't got an update with them. But there is such a privilege, and God does it through our own personalities and our own ways. Like, I play guitar, but I didn't get a call that Charlie got. Charlie, you could have invited me. It could have been just you and I, mate. I could have been backup support for you. But I didn't get that call. And God won't put you in a place that you don't have the gifting and the experience and stuff. But imagine if we could just say yes to the promptings of the Holy Spirit, yes to the next little God set up. You just never know how that could work with what someone else is doing and how God could work. And so we're just going to sing this last song. It's called Graves to Gardens. It's an exchange. It's a song about what God wants to do in this beautiful exchange. And if you want a prayer, I know some people last week would have loved to have been prayed for trusting God more. If that's you, just come out. If you just want to respond in any way, it's a song that we're deliberately doing for you to have an opportunity to respond. If you want prayer for anything, I'd just come out while this song's being sung.